Good afternoon, students, and welcome to the presentation on Support Kit for Beginning Teachers, Rural and Remote Queensland. My name is Vicki Field, and I am from the University of Southern Queensland. What do you think of when you hear the words rural and remote? Maybe no more traffic jams, no more smog, no more noise, peace and quiet. But what is it really like? We'll take a moment now just to view this short clip. Now, firstly, the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission in the year 2000 stated that most teacher training does not adequately equip new teachers, such as yourselves, with the skills and knowledge needed for teaching in a rural and remote Australia. Well, the University of Southern Queensland has actually taken this on board and now offer courses like this to fully equip new teachers heading into rural and remote areas. Today we have two objectives, and they are to understand the issue of student non-attendance and the policies that were created to address non-attendance, and also to understand the importance of teacher well-being. In the year 2008, the Council of Australian Governments agreed to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. This particular policy was called the National Integrated Strategy for Closing the Gap in Indigenous Disadvantage. It's now commonly referred to as the Closing the Gap policy. There were 6 main target areas, and of these target areas, we will be looking at point 4 today, which states that it should halve the gap for Indigenous students in reading, writing and numeracy within a decade. Education itself actually underpins all of the 6 target areas. 2 years later, another policy was formulated, and that was called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Action Plan, which is commonly referred to as the Plan, in 2010. Now that plan delved further into education, and once again a major area of this policy is attendance. So now we're going to look at some results to see how far these policies have actually acted on student non-attendance. So we have the results so far. Of the 6 target areas, only 2 are on track. And the one that is important for yourselves as new teachers is the halve the gap for Indigenous students in reading, writing and numeracy within a decade. It's now 2015, it's not on track, and the worst thing with this is that there has been no improvement since 2008. So I'd like you to start to think how that's going to affect your classroom. We're going to break down these attendance statistics a little bit further. This is attendance rate for overall, so for all students attending. And at the moment, if we have a look at this particular column on the attendance rate column, you can see that the Metropolitan has a 92.3% attendance rate, Whereas some of our other areas, far North Queensland, North Queensland, they don't even reach 90% full attendance. And if we look at the figures on the far right-hand side, over this, in this particular column over here, this is actually for students that attend school less than 85% of the time. So in the far North Queensland, that's a whopping 22.4% of the population, the student population, that don't attend school less than 85%. So it's already low, and now it's even lower. When you compare that with the metropolitan region, right down here, they only have 13.5%. So now you have to think that you're looking at classrooms where your attendance is quite low. Now we'll break the attendance statistics down even further. We have our top two lines here are for our non-Indigenous students and the bottom two lines for our Indigenous students. As you can see over here in 2008, the gap was quite small, but then it started to widen again in 2009. So this year the government has been looking at the attendance rate and think, well, what can they do to improve it? So they've actually made a new policy, and this one is called the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Strategy. And this one is commonly referred to as the strategy. So we have closing the gap, then we have the plan, now we have the strategy. And attendance and engagement is now top of the focus points. So I'd like us to really look at the causes of absenteeism, because then that can start to maybe help you think on what you can do to combat it within your own classroom. Generational beliefs, poor relationships, and irrelevant school programs have all stemmed actually from the stolen generation. Now you must remember that many Indigenous peoples are still very afraid of education. And there's another major cause of absenteeism, and that's where English is a second language. Now, if many of you students like to think back to prac, and you would have had maybe some students from other backgrounds, and how difficult it was for them to grasp English. So let's have a look at actually what you can do for your classroom. Another area that we'll be looking at is the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. Now we're going to incorporate these into your classrooms to see what you can do. So first of all, we have creative classrooms. Start to think outside the box. Make it personal and have meaningful communication. So creative classrooms, the standards say manage classroom activities. Don't always have the same boring old things standing at the front. Find ways of delivering your programs in an exciting, innovative way. Think outside the box. Evaluate your own teaching. Ask someone to come and have a look at you to see if there's something that you can do to improve your own personal teaching programs. Make it personal and meaningful communication. These two go hand in hand. Support everyone, regardless of the student's disability, and use effective communication, making sure that people do understand what you are talking about. First of all, engage the whole family. Invite the Indigenous elders into the classroom. Invite the extended family members. Talk to them. Find out what they feel about the way their students are being educated. Build a creative classroom. Make it relative to the students. Think of the community. Think what the community can offer you to take a lesson outside the four walls. Learn all you can about specific disabilities, and you could even look at that before you go. If a child has this particular disability, how would you cater for them? The Indigenous peoples are very, very connected to each other and their land. So come up with other ideas. If a student likes to write, so they can become an author, go off to uni, but come back and actually write from their own home, from their hometown. They could be a pilot and actually learn to fly planes, but fly planes over where they live. So these are different ideas and strategies, thinking outside the box to help you as the teacher combat your student absenteeism. The biggest one of all is working together, using the policies of closing the gap, the plan, the strategy, alongside with the Australian Professional Teaching Standard. All these three things link together, and you, as the beginning teacher, can make a difference to alleviate non-attendance in your school. This brings us on to your own personal teacher well-being. I'd like to read this to you actually. It has been well documented that there is a crisis in rural and remote education, particularly in terms of educational disadvantage and the retention rates of teachers. This is what this particular course is all about. It's all about giving you knowledge. It's all about equipping you, understanding what can and can't happen, so you are prepared so you don't become a statistic. And your teaching career extends for years and years. The Queensland Government addressed this by they produced a kit, and it's actually called the Flying Start Induction Toolkit for beginning teachers. I'd like you to think back now, we'll just digress a minute, from the images that we first looked at this morning. There was a common theme that ran through all of the images. Did you recognise it? It was actually vastness. And with vastness can quite often come loneliness. I'd like to introduce you to this transactional model of stress, just so you have an understanding of what can happen to you in this environment and make sure that you don't let it overtake you. First of all, on the far right side of our screen, we have a situation or event happens and you go, oh my goodness, maybe I don't have any accommodation when I get out there. You perceive the threat as no threat, so it's actually no stress. And then we have the section in the middle when you perceive the threat and you go, you have the ability to cope with it. Okay, you don't have any accommodation. I can phone up the principal, maybe go down the local police station or something, say, hey, I'm new in town, haven't got anywhere to stay, who can I see? So your perception gives you the ability to cope with it, and that's a positive stress. On the far left of the actual model, we have the perceived threat, but it's the inability to cope with the threat. You could have small things that start to mount up. You didn't have the right accommodation. You can't get into your classroom. You've been told you have to teach a certain way. You've been told that you have to do different things that you're not normally used to. And all of a sudden, all these perceived threats start to build, and that creates a negative stress, and that has an effect on your well-being. There's a few other things that I'd like to address, especially moving out to a rural and remote environment, and that's lack of anonymity, differing teaching ideas, isolation, and accessibility. In a small area, everyone knows you. You're the new person in town. Everyone says, there's the new teacher. Did you see the new teacher? Did you need? But you have to be professional in all your dealings all of the time, because that comes from the Australian professional standards. You must meet professional ethics and responsibilities. So that can have you feeling quite anxious. Differing teaching ideas can have you feeling very frustrated because you're not used to teaching a certain way. Say accessibility. You can't shop. There isn't a Coles or a Kmart or a Woolies down the road, and all of a sudden all these feelings are starting to mount up. So that's where we come back to our transaction model of stress and think, all right, what can I do about it? Who can I talk to? Within the Flying Start Induction Toolkit for beginning teachers, there is everything in that toolkit, from your letter of appointment to starting your first day. Being aware of your own personal health. How do you feel generally? Are you excited about going, a bit nervous? Contact with family and friends regularly. Before you leave, say, hey, let's make a time. I want to phone Sunday night between 6 and 8, just to have a good talk, a good cry. Quite often just brings the stress load down, talking to family and friends. Invite them to come and visit you. Check out what the town has to offer before you leave. If they don't have a gym, if they don't have any other facilities that you're used to, you maybe like bike riding. Go and buy a bike before you leave and take it with you so you can bring certain equipment with you. Seek help from other professionals. Talk to other teachers. Talk to the principal. And don't forget to give yourself space. Everything's new. It is going to be exciting. You'll have wonderful times. You'll also have some low times. But be aware of that before you leave. I've got some further reading here for you. So we have the whole Flying Start toolkit for you. We have the Kids Parent Helpline. Sometimes you'll have students who need to talk to someone. You can advise them of this. The Queensland Government Mental Helpline. Do not think that you cannot phone them just to have someone to talk to. That is the biggest piece of advice that I can give you. Keep talking to people. The Queensland Teachers College, the Queensland Teachers Union, and also the Royal Flying Doctor Service, because you may need them when you're out there. There's a great clip down the bottom here, called Helpful Ideas for Creative Classrooms. This actually goes for about 25 minutes. So in your spare time, before you leave, sit down, have a good watch, and think how they're actually going about building creative classrooms. It has some great strategies in there for you as the new teacher. So that sort of brings us towards the end, and I'd like you to think on this, that each and every Australian has a right to an engaging and thought-provoking education, regardless of their geographical location or socio and economic status. We'll just watch this short clip because we're going to go out with some fun. So we'll just play this for a moment.
Well, students, that brings us to the end of our presentation. I do have some prezzies for you though. The actual PowerPoints done up on hardcover. I also have embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders perspectives in for you, so you can go through these. Now, if we'd like to have a member of the audience pop up. Thank you. First of all, we have our broad brim hat to keep the sun and flies out. Next, we have our air guard. And we have our little and book. So this is so you can write stories. And yes, all these stories home. When you're feeling a little bit teary, we have what everyone loves, a block of chocolate. Hope it doesn't melt before you get there. And never go west without your little traveller here, your bottle of water. And we have our tea. Tea is a great thirst quencher. Even if you're a coffee drinker, when you're out west. Okay. Oh. Now, this one you'll love. This is a crepe bandage. And this is really good for snake bites. So we're just going to pop that in anyway. Not that anything's going to happen, but you've got the snake bandage. And being USQ, we have our lovely USQ pen, which is a USB. And I actually have the presentation in USB format for you as well. So there you are. There's a little bag to put them all in. Thank you, Miss. And enjoy. Have an amazing time in your rural and remote locations.